career, and I was only 20 at the time, but I think I'm fairly well tucked together, you know, I mean, and so what was going on? I mean, there's a couple of models that you can apply to this. One was, well, we had this simultaneous psychosis, you know, and what came out of it for Terence was the time wave. Actually, the kernel of the concepts of the time wave, which a lot of you are familiar with, if you've read Invisible Landscape or True Hallucination, the kernel of those ideas really happened in this psychotic period when Terence started charting different periods of time, not even related to the I Ching, started counting days back from March 4th, 71, and forward from March 4th, 71, and he counted like the number of days since our mother's death, which had happened the previous October, and the number of days between March 4th and his birthday in 1971, and these multiples of 64 kept coming up. And he looked at that, and he looked at the I Ching, and it's like, oh, you know, there's some kind of a map here of time, and what he thought he was charting was the moment at which this object, we refused to believe that we'd failed. We thought we'd succeeded, because the teacher told us that we had succeeded, but our timing was off. So it became all about the stone will appear. When will the stone appear? You know, and then he started looking at these charts and all that, and I was much more disengaged than he was. I couldn't give a damn when the stone would appear. I wasn't even engaged. I was just cruising the universe and appeared to be a lot less engaged. But eventually I came back. And in some sense you could say that Terence never came back, you know, because he was functional all of his life, but he elaborated this theory that started at La Chirera into this whole theory about the time wave, and kept elaborating its mathematics and creating this thing, and it was all a game to try to predict when would the stone condense. When would the stone appear? Because the condensation of the stone would spell the end of time, right? It would spell the end of time. It was the transcendental atemporal object at the end of history. And so he elaborated these theories to the point where, you know, he kept, and this went on for years, as you know, if you know his story and you've read The Invisible Landscape. Finally he came up with the idea, well, it's going to be December 21st, 2012. Right? And as it turns out, that happened to be the end of the Mayan calendar. So bingo, you know, here's a couple of different traditions, and his predicted end date was sufficiently close to that. And we're talking about cycles of billions of years. He just could nudge it a little and say, well, it will be December 21st, 2012. Well, we all know what happened on December 21st, 2012. Not much. Certainly not the collapse of the space-time continuum, although plenty of people predicted that. Or maybe it did collapse. You know, that's the unsettling thought. Maybe it did collapse, because, you know, we always said it'll collapse. You know, it's going to happen, but there will be not a twitch on 1,000 cosmic dials. It will just, you know, smoothly move into hyperspace. But I don't think so. I mean, here we are, December 2012. December 21st, 2012 is kind of the biggest non-event in human history so far. And well, so that was it. You know, I mean, I can't explain everything about the experiment at La Chirera. I can't even explain it to myself anymore. You know, what got us into that. But what I did start to say, what I was going to say was, there's a couple of models here. You could say, well, one, it was just this simultaneous psychosis of two brothers, very closely related and almost almost like, you know, right and left brain aspects of each other. We've thought of ourselves that way. And, you know, it was a simultaneous psychosis, and there's actually a term in this in psychology called the folie of deux, the folly of two. And simultaneous psychosis, often of siblings, does take place. So you can look at it that way. I prefer to put a nicer cast on it, a more flattering cast on it in a certain way. At least from my own experience, it was analogous to a shamanic initiation. And again, I am not a shaman, but I kind of went through that. It was a shamanic initiation, and that shamanism is very much often about being totally torn apart and then being put back together again. And sometimes in a transformed way, you know, in shamanic traditions that put crystals and things inside your body and so on. And it was very similar to what we were kind of trying to do. We said we're operating on our own DNA, and we're creating this DNA, and we're using sound to get it to pop into a superconducting state, and it will produce a standing waveform that would radiate out the information in DNA, which we assume to be all information. Well, you know, this is crazy talk, right? This is nuts. But maybe not so nuts. You know, there's now new evidence that's emerging to show that DNA contains kinds of information that has more to do with more things than just determining the structures of proteins. I mean, there's a tertiary structure of DNA that's more like a language, and you know, it has syntax and all that. And that's the interesting thing about the experiment of La Chorrera and some of the suppositions that we had. You know, a lot of it was clearly bunk and was clearly just delusion. But some of those things actually have sort of panned out in some ways. I mean, the idea that DNA can be superconductive at certain, that's what we were trying to do. Well, it turns out it can be superconductive, you know, under certain conditions. What does that mean? I don't know, but this was 40 years before anyone even thought that idea. So I don't know. I don't know. Yes?
Can you explain in other words what the teacher of the mushroom in that experiment told you to do? Like, what was the actual method or the ritual that you...
It told us to set up a mushroom, bring one in from the field on its cow pie, you know, still alive and metabolizing, and it told us to take an enormous dose of mushrooms to the point where we could hear this sound inside our head that the teacher suggested we could hear it, and it said, imitate that sound and direct it at the mushroom, and it will cause this resonance. It will activate the DNA in the mushroom. The sound is caused. Here's what we said. Now, physicists among you, please bear with me, because I know this is completely crazy, but it said the sound that you're hearing in the DNA, the sound that you're hearing in your head is the electron spin resonance of the tryptamines intercalating into the DNA in your neural matrix. Well, that's another interesting thing that, you know, again, the idea that tryptamines intercalate into DNA, and at the time we didn't understand even what the neuroreceptor looked like, and we now completely know what it looks like, but there was a speculation at the time that maybe the neuroreceptor was pieces of nucleic acid in the neural membranes, and we took that as more or less proven, and we said these tryptamines intercalate, they insert themselves between the base pairs of the DNA, and they generate this electron spin resonance. Well, I mean, that's not physics, that's pseudo, that it doesn't work that way. That's not how electron spin resonance works. But we were being told. And but the idea that these tryptamines intercalate into DNA, that's been established. They do in the test tube. Whether they do in the biological system is another matter. But they do readily insert between the base pairs of DNA under certain conditions. Anyway, the mushroom told us if you make this sound, if you direct it at the mushroom, it will trigger this effect. It will cause the beta carbolines to insert into the DNA, and it will cause the DNA to drop into a superconducting state that's self-sustaining, and will start to generate this information as a standing waveform, and that's what we'll be experiencing. I can't believe I'm saying this. This is
Well, if it's any consolation, it makes perfect sense to me.
well, good.
It sounds like a diagram of reincarnation theory, standing wave, something that the intermediary medium, standing wave in what medium? Taking from the physical, generating information in perpetuity. That's the word.
Right, kind of like the resurrection body idea, and I mean, I don't know what to say about it. I mean, it was, we believed it, we did it, and nothing happened except that we had this simultaneous psychosis, and and everything that happened to us personally has been pre-La Chirera and post-La Chirera, and it's kind of weird in some ways to be standing up here. I mean, it's strange to be known for, your psychosis that happened to you when you were 20, because I mean, I went ahead and had a life and did other things, and nothing as spectacular as that, but a few more or less reasonable things. I don't know what to make of it to this day. I don't regret it for a minute. It was like an amazing experiment, and when I was in it, I didn't have thoughts like you're crazy or anything like that. So I didn't have any reason to regret it. It was what was happening, and that was just the case. Since then, well, it's made for great stories, It's made for a kind of career, although, I've made my life, I've done other things in my career, but I don't regret it. And I feel, actually, it probably was a very healing thing. I'm very happy that that our companions didn't get their way and get us flown out of there to some psychiatric facility in Leticia, Colombia. I mean, can you imagine? The very idea is horrifying. They had to let it play out. And because it played out, Terence and I both came back better men than we went into it. I mean, I feel like I'm better. I'm not damaged. And Terence was maybe, well, he wasn't really damaged because he never really lost function. He came away with a persistent delusion, in a way, about time that he worked on for 20 years or so, trying to figure out all these cycles and all that. And that turned out to be, it wasn't what he predicted, in that, the world did not end on December 21st, 2012. But in some ways, that mathematical construction he made based on the I Ching was a very interesting artifact. Just if it was as a mathematical object, it was kind of beautiful, even though it was, what was it? Who knows what it was, or is, obviously not an instrument that describes the structure of time. It wasn't that.
We need to
clear out.
yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. This was
I was actually reminded of a couple of things, actually, watching the film. One was, one of the narrators is William S. Burroughs.
Yeah.
And next week we're celebrating what would have been his 100th birthday. So there's events all week long. We're showing films. I mean, it's, please come and join us. And also, our next event here is going to be with Davi Kopanawa, that Survival International and Harvard University Press are actually flying up from the Amazon. He's going to have translators with him. So a rare opportunity to actually meet a curandero in the flesh, and it's going to be a really special moment. So Davi